Hello, this is a tutorial on entering the beginning songwriter assignment, which you will see here. We'll start with the melody part. The melody is the part that you would sing, and as mentioned on the first page, the notes in this melody are part of the pentatonic scale. So we have C, E here, D, more E, here's G and A, and really those are the only pitches that we use. So C, D, E, G, and A. We're skipping over F, and we're skipping over B. Down here, we're going to run into some issues with ledger lines. So we have a G and an A down here, and back to C, A, G, D, E, C, or sorry, D, E, A, C, A, G, D, C. All right, and that's going to be the first composed part of the melody, and then you're going to compose your own for the second half. So I'm going to use the classic electric piano just for now, and Command-click to open a place to write. I'm going to use the score window for the moment, and I'm going to drag this out to bar 9, and that will give me my 8 bars of music here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. To make it look more like this, I'm going to get rid of the 2 staves and just get rid of, and just show the treble clef. So I did that again by holding this, and you can get your different staves that way. I'll zoom in a little bit to get more space, and then start with notes. I have a dotted half note. There we go. Now, I could enter each note separately with its own rhythmic value, but what I'm going to do this time is try a method by looking at the shortest time value that I have, which is the 8th note here. I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to go to 8th notes here and go into my piano roll. So there's my first 1, 2, 3 beat note, and I'm just going to start putting in notes that are 8th notes. At the positions, these are actually for some reason coming out as 16th notes. I'm going to put them in as 8th notes. Alright. And so even though they're supposed to be quarter notes and so on, I've got a long 3-beat note, a note on beat 4, a note on beat 1, 2 notes on beat 4 right here. And I'm not picking any pitches in particular either yet. Just entering this rhythm. I've got 3, a note that lasts for 1, 2, 3, and then that's the 4th one. Each of these are on beat 3 and 4. This is on beat 1, and then we've got these 2 on beat 4. Moving on, the same pattern here. Beat 4, beat 1, 2 on beat 4, 2 on beat 1, beat 2, 3, and 4, and beat 1. Okay, so it's going to look like this when we're done. It's kind of filling out the space a little bit. And it's just playing on those. Alright, so now I'm going to take those and extend them all to fill up the space. Any notes that are the same length, now here's a little trick. I'm going to take these three and extend them all at the same time. And this one gets longer. I'll just take all of these ones, and I'm holding shift now and grabbing all of these ones too. I'm going to extend them by one. If they're long enough, I'll leave them alone. I'll select other ones that are not long enough, like this one and this one, until they're all long enough. And this one here at the end. There we go. So now that's our actual rhythm. And now I'm going to take my pitches and move them up to what they're supposed to be on. There's an E, D, grab those two notes together. Now, what many people find is that sometimes they'll end up looking like they're on the right note, but actually being on a flat. And the difference between that, you can see here, right, is between those two notes. And we want to be on the E, which is shown up here. Or sometimes you may show on a G, an A flat here. It's showing all flats right now. You may show on a C sharp as well. Okay, so there's the C sharp, and it actually wants to be this note down here. Right? So it's a difference of one, what's called a semitone. That's a very important distinction, so you need to make sure you're on the right note. Now these two here are going to come down. And notice that as I'm doing this, you can see the G pitch shown in the little box there. Okay, I just did it quickly there to see what they all should look like, and now there's our melody. So it should be a D. Alright, so there's our melody, the first part, and now I'm going to duplicate this track, and just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to enter the chords with the same instrument for now. They're all whole notes, so we have a C, E, and G. And notice up here it says C. This is a C major chord. And C and C here are the bottom notes, and also down in the bass clef you'll see this C down here as well. So all of the chords are shown here, the names of them. So C, G, these are all G's on the bottom. A, these are all A's, and so on. And this is what we call a chord progression. It's a sequence of chords that move and provide background to the melody and support. And the bass and the chords go together and need to sort of agree with each other. So I'm going to start out by just putting in, and I'm going to do a little shortcut here. I'm going to put in one whole note. So there's my first C. Now, I'm going to copy that C. I don't even know if it's on the right C right now. I'm going to paste it just next door. So I'm moving my cursor right over here and pasting. And see, it's pasted right on top. And I'm going to grab that one carefully and drag it up to the E, which is the next note. And I'm going to paste it again. I could paste it in the same place. I can actually paste it next door here too. And there, I can now place that one on the E. And I know the next one is supposed to be an octave below, so we have a C3 here. We'll also want a C2. Now this may actually end up showing incorrectly. Yeah, it's an octave too low. So I can take this whole thing now and grab it, bring it up an octave, and now it shows correctly, like so. Now, my next trick is going to be to take this whole thing, copy it, and paste it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oops. Let's actually do it this way. I've now got 2 chords up here. I'm going to copy this whole block and paste it across. Okay, and this is what I call being efficient with your entry. So when you have repeated patterns, oops, whenever you have repeated patterns, you should try to enter them efficiently. Something was looking funny there, but it's okay. All right. So this second chord is a G, and it moves down. So I'm going to move this whole thing down to G. You can't hear it, but it's going to move. I'm going to keep it in the same position. It's too low. There it is. To G2. Here's A. We're going to notice a problem with A. This middle note here is a C sharp, and it needs to be a C natural because this is an A minor chord. So I'll show you the difference between A minor and A major in just a second here. Just to make it easier to see this stuff, I'm going to join these into one track and then take a look at the piano roll here. So you notice that all across here, these are now major chords. But this one here, which I just made minor, if I put it next to my major chords, you can see there's one, oops. If I take the middle note and bring it down by 1. So we have one note, a middle note, and a top note. And these I'm going to call 1, 3, and 5, which will become evident later why. So the 1, the 3, and the 5. The 1 and the 5 stay in the same place, but the 3 moves down by a single step here. So when I bring this down to A minor, it will look correct. And the last chord is F, and it also goes down. Okay, so that should sound like And again, just quickly, if I were to take all of these major chords and put them back up together and compare them side by side, they would all look the same except for the minor chord, which has that one little step down on the middle note, which is called the third. Put those back. And actually, for the sake of efficiency, since the second round is the same as the first round, I'm actually going to delete these and just copy and paste these ones. Now, that's our chords part. Now we'll begin our bass part. And the bass part here is going to look a little bit different when we put it in. First of all, again, I'm going to take a duplicate track, put it on score view for a second, and again change this to look like bass only. And To enter this basically, you would put in what we're seeing in the part is, well, let me just show you. These eighth notes here, oops, you can see there are 8 of them in a bar. Okay, so 8 of them in a bar to play with. And so in this bar of music we have, I'm going to count the rhythm in terms of how many eighth notes it is. So a dotted quarter note, 1 quarter note is 2 eighth notes, and a dotted quarter note would be, so that's 1 quarter note, a dotted quarter note would be 3. So our first note is going to be worth 3 eighth notes. Then we have another dotted quarter note, which is another 3. So there's 1, 2, 3. Again, I'll delete those 2 and extend this one. And then the last one is just a quarter note, which is 2. There they are. So our rhythm is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Okay. And the first 2 notes stay on that C root note, which we call the 1 or the root note. And then this one here is called the 5, which is the same as the 5th note up here. We have C, E, and G up here, and we have C and G down here. That comes from counting up the scale from C. I'll just bring up a keyboard for a second here. So when we count the notes in a scale, we start, say, on C, we call that 1, 2, 3, that's E, 4, that's 5G, 6 is A, 7 is B, and we go back to 1, or we can call it 8 as well. Back on C again. So our chords are made of 1, 3, and 5, and our bass line is made of 1 and 5. Now, interestingly, as a bass player, you can both go 1 and 5 up here, or you can go down from 1 to 5 this way. So just to show that again, C is the 1 or the root note, and G is the 5 note. And you can either go up to it or down to it. So bass players will often go, oops. So I'll do this with keyboard. Or they'll go up to the 5. So the 5 note is the note that's very often used by bass players after they play this root note. So in this case, a good way to find that 5 note is to count up from a root note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 little steps. Or you can count down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So up 7 or down 5. In this one here, it asks us to go up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can see it says plus 7 there as well, which makes it easy to find. And that would sound like, okay. But if we had gone down, minus 5 also brings us to G. And it sounds like this. And bass players will often mix and match those two, going up to the 5 note and going down to the 5 note. But again here, in this song, we're going to go up to it. And again, I'm going to just copy these regions. This is what it looks like, by the way, at the end. You may notice that it doesn't look quite the same as it did on the sheet, and that's because GarageBand likes to group its notes into sets of 2 beats, which is actually a more proper way to do it. So we have 1, 2 beats at the end here, and 1 and a half and 2 here. So these two beats and these two beats are kept separate. And instead of drawing a dotted quarter note here, they do a tie, which makes it into the same thing. One thing I'm fond of saying is that if you ever are not sure if your score view is correct, you can look kind of under the hood at the music back here in the MIDI view and see whether it's actually correct. So I'm now going to copy this region, and I'm only going to do it 4 times this time because I know I'm going to end up copying and pasting it for the second 4 like I did last time. And I'm now going to take these and move them to their correct notes. So we had G for the second one, A for the third one, and F for the last one. You've noticed that I didn't have to change any notes in, I'm just joining those together again. I didn't have to change any notes in the A this time. And that's because the A here doesn't have the middle note, doesn't have that C that needed to be changed. There's only a 1 and a 5. So now the whole thing should sound like and so on. I'm just going to copy this and paste it to the second half, and then join these two together. And we're getting close to finish the first section of this piece. But one thing you'll probably notice is that it's a bit hard to hear all of the parts because really our notes are being played by the same instrument and in the same place. They're overlapping a lot. So one thing you want to do as an arranger and composer is to try and give some separation to those things. So the first way I'm going to do this is by changing instruments. And so I'm going to take my bass, make it into some kind of other bass instrument. That's a little better. My chords are in a good place. So the two of these together should sound okay now. Okay, but now my melody is just a bit in the middle of things and a little too difficult to hear. It's impossible to hear right now because I've turned it off, but if I turn it back on, there's 2 ways that I can approach it. So the first way is by changing the instrument. So maybe I'll take it and put it as a flute for the moment. We can use let's use a flute part here. Alright, so that cuts through a little bit more. This, by the way, is a wrong note. And another approach you can take is to change the range. So here we have this note starting on C3, and we have these chords on C3 as well. And they're actually up in the C4 area too. So if I take my whole part, Command A to select everything, and if I bring it up to C5, it's quite high for a flute, but it's going to look very high on here now. But a bit more flute-like, really. And if I play the whole thing now, I might take that down by an octave for the first time through. Okay. Next, I'm going to add a little drum part. So duplicate track again, bring in a drum kit, and my usual go-to for a drum beat is the backbeat, which I'm going to enter first. So we've already done a backbeat in which we have a snare drum on beats 2. Oops. Oh. Just use my Brooklyn drum kit here. And if you put your snare drum on beat 2 and 4, that's actually the backbeat right there. So just to hear how it would play out. Doesn't sound like much right now, but that's the basic part of the backbeat. So let's just add some things in to make that a bit more interesting. First thing we can add is some bass drum. Oops. Shorten these to 1/8 notes. That would sound like. Okay, so that pattern could work. And you can add some hi-hat. Paste it over here again. Alright, so that's a perfectly acceptable basic beat. Just play a little bit of that first. Okay, but here's another idea. And it's a little trick that I use sometimes, which is to take the bass part and copy it down onto the drum part and use what the bass player is playing as a starting point for what the drums should play. So it's going to sound weird right now. Yeah, that's not quite what we want. But if I get rid of, notice that it's all a repeating rhythmic pattern. And if I take these notes here, put them down on our drums, bass and snare. Okay, so now we're getting a drum part that follows along with the bass part. And let's just see how that sounds. Okay. And I'll just put in some hi-hat again here. Okay, and that's a good trick. This is no longer a backbeat, really, but it is a beat that will go along well with this part. We can modify this a little bit, maybe to make it more interesting. So 1, 2, 3, maybe I'll take these guys and make them a little louder. It's not too easy to hear. Undo that and make it a bit more obvious. And on this one, I'm going to have it sizzle a little bit. That didn't go very much. I think this drum kit doesn't have as much of a sizzle on it. Okay. So I'll use that twice. And on the third one, I'll change it a little bit to this. And then on the fourth one, I'm going to change it into a backbeat. I'll keep that hi-hat in there though. And copy that through 4 times. And on the very last one, I'm going to make a little fill, a very small fill of 16th notes. Let's see how that sounds now. Now, that's the end of our first phrase. Our second phrase is going to be the same thing, but you're going to write your own melody in this section here in a similar style to the first part. Now, one thing I like to always do, though, at the beginning, whenever I have a fill like that, is to start the next beat after that fill with a crash cymbal. And the crash cymbal is found up here on C#2, so it sounds like this. Okay, and I'm going to change this to a ride cymbal now, which is D#2. And the second bar also stay on the ride cymbal. In fact, can we keep that cymbal hi-hat in there? Not bad. I think I'll make it into a ride cymbal as well. So to do that change for all of these bars would be a little time consuming, so I'm going to take them all up at once. Grab all of those. And for the very last one, I'm going to do a little extra fill. And the trick to this fill is going to be to take this pattern and reverse it. So I'm going to have ta-ta-ta, this is going to sound like this. That is the main pattern. And I'm going to have it land the first time on beat 2, but I'm going to copy it a few times. And you'll see that it kind of runs over the end, which is what we want. Alright, because this is actually going to be our very last note on a crash cymbal. And I'm going to throw in some toms. I'm going to stop with this ride cymbal because it's a human being with only 2 arms, and it's going to take 2 hands to do this part. So it's going to start like this. But I'm going to move each of these patterns to a different tom. Except for the very last one, which will be in a bass drum and a crash cymbal. Okay, that's a little closing drum fill. I'm actually going to keep this one on a hi-hat here, an open hi-hat. Alright, so that's one of my rules, is to end on a beat 1 of the next part, so bar 17. So we actually need to copy these as well. We'll just play their first note, but shorten them. Alright, those guys are going to need to be a little longer. But we're going to stop the movement of them. So this bass part is just going to end with a long note here. Okay. Now we're getting somewhere. For the last part, which is the adding of your own melody, I'm just going to copy the first part into the second part. And, oops. I'm just going to modify it rather than starting from scratch. I take that back. I'm going to record a rhythm using my keyboard. And just see how it goes. So I just tried some little things there. I'm going to clean it up. And I'm just using one note because I just wanted to get the rhythmic idea first. Although in my head as I'm doing it, I can kind of hear what I might want it to do melodically. So I'm going to take all these and turn them into, let's try 16th notes first and see how that sounds. Okay, a little bit more detailed than I wanted it, so I'm just going to go back out and do 8th notes instead. think that's going to be okay. So my last note, since we're ending on a C chord, I want to end it on either a C, an E, or a G, which is the notes of the chord. So like this. And I'm generally going to try to have the main notes of this melody be the same notes as the notes in the chord. So the first chord is C, so I'm using G, G, A, C, D, E. Okay, so here's the C, the E, and the G of the chord. There's one A that doesn't fit, and that's okay. Now the next chord is the G, and the notes of that are G, B, D. So I'm going to go to a D, which fits that. The next chord, I'm okay with those notes there. The next chord is A minor, so A, C, E. I'm going to start on the A, to the C, so here's your A, C, and E, and one extra note. The last chord is F, so F, A, C. So this is closest to an A. It's got the same rhythm here as before. So I've got my chord again is C, so C, E, and G would be the notes to use. I'm using a mixture of C, G, and A. The next chord is G, which is G, B, D. So here's G, B, sorry, G and D, there's no B. And our last chord here is, or we have our A minor next. And the last one is F, F-A-C. So I'll use the Okay, so that works. So again, a principle here that I'd like you to grab is when you're making melodies, try to use the notes that are being played in the chords at the same time. One last thing I might do is, since this whole thing started down here fairly high, I think I'm going to take this whole thing and move it up an octave higher. And that'll give it a sense of shape moving towards a very high note at the end. Okay, I like that. I'm going to just make that last note a little bit longer. Oops, not every note. Just one extra beat there, I think, should be fine. I have to get rid of that chord again. I'll make this last the same length. And this bass note. I feel like I've Okay, that's the end of the basic beginner songwriter example. These are a few advanced techniques for changing your chords, which we will deal with in later assignments and you don't need to do here. But if you want to make your sound a bit more sophisticated, you'll notice how the chords jump around like this, and these are all called root position chords because the bottom note is the name of the chord. C here, G here, etc. But what I'm going to do now is just try a little trick where I'll let my bass note move around, but these chords I'm going to try to make their little tubes connect kind of this way. And so here we have one that doesn't go anywhere, so I'm going to bring this an octave up. This is called inverting the chord. Oops, I have an extra one there. I must have copied that one. There we go. And this one is closest to here, so I'm going to take this one up an octave. By up an octave, I just mean going from, say, A3 to A4. All right, we're trying to have the tubes the notes kind of connect to each other. So here, this one goes through, and these two kind of end. So I'm just going to grab them both and bring them up. And when you do that, you should find that they kind of line up with the other ones. And here, now we have a continuous line moving along here, a continuous line here, and a continuous line here, which sounds like this. Okay, not necessarily that much better than the other way, but it's a very small difference that will change the overall sound of your piece. So I'm just going to copy that. Okay, so now we have that pattern going, and that's called using inversions. Now the next thing I'd like to try is, instead of having these all as solid, unbroken chords, solid chords playing at the same time, I'm going to change the rhythm of those chords. So one way to do that is, and you don't have to have inverted them to do this, we could do a number of things. I'm going to first start by doing kind of I'll do a block chord, but with a rhythm to it now. Oops. And I'm just going to paste these one at a time for a moment, and then I'm going to try grabbing all of them. Okay, so each of the chords is being played in a rhythm now. All right, so a little bit hard on the ears the way it is right now, but if you were to add some accents and make these, say, a little louder on the beginning of each of the bass notes, that can start making things a bit more interesting. So say, bumping up the velocity on those. Okay, it's not too subtle on this instrument, but it can be done with effectiveness in other ways, and a lot of keyboard players do end up doing that kind of chord rhythm. You can also leave some spaces where those notes are happening, so the bass fills in that space. Let's just try that with the bass and the piano together. Okay. Again, I'm not liking this electric piano sound so much with this kind of technique, but let's try a few other things. The next idea is to break up your chords in time. And so the trick I'm going to do here is to take them, I'll shorten them again, and I'm going to take the top notes. You'll see I'm going to use a selection trick here, where I'm going to select all the top notes. And this works much better if you've already done that inversion trick. Oops. To grab the ones that I missed, I'm going to hit Shift and grab them like that. And I'm going to move the whole thing over. That's what's going on down there. And then I'm going to take the top note and drag it over by one. So we get this kind of thing. I have a whole bunch of copies of that one note